Welcome to the Quiet Strength Podcast, Fathers in a Failing World. I'm Giacomo Knox. We live in a time when the role of fathers is often misunderstood, sometimes ignored, and occasionally even ridiculed. Yet throughout history, strong fathers, sometimes loud but often quiet, have held families, communities, and entire civilizations together. This podcast explores that quiet strength. Each episode brings together thoughtful conversations about fatherhood, responsibility, faith, forgiveness, and the challenges men face in raising the next generation. Some of these conversations are inspired by research, history, and emerging technology that helps us explore important new ideas in new ways. This is an independent production, built by people who believe that strong families and strong fathers still matter. As the show grows, we are always interested in connecting with organizations and partners who want to help us support meaningful conversations about fatherhood and legacy. But at the heart of every episode is a simple question. What does it mean to be a good father in a world that sometimes feels like it's falling apart? This is the Quiet Strength Podcast. Let's begin.
Welcome to the debate. When a father looks at his newborn child, his brain is supposed to, flood with oxytocin.
Right, the bonding hormone.
Exactly. It brings warmth, profound connection, all of that. But for men who survived abuse or neglect in their own childhoods, that exact same biological trigger can actually misfire.
Yeah, it's a stark and, deeply counterintuitive reality. Instead of oxytocin, the brain just releases a flood of stress hormones.
It turns this moment of profound love into a state of uncontrollable physiological panic.
And that brings us to the core of what we're looking at today. We are examining the long, invisible shadow of child maltreatment trauma, or CMT.
Right, because when a man transitions to fatherhood, the very act of parenting can act as a trigger, resurrecting the ghosts of his own fatherless or abusive home.
It's a profound challenge.
It really is. So the central tension we're exploring today is this. Can a committed practice of conscious parenting and deep self-reflection alone break the cycle of deeply rooted generational trauma?
Or, conversely, does the biological and psychological severity of CMT necessitate professional, clinical therapy?
Right. I'll be arguing that intentional, conscious parenting and self-correction are actually the primary, most accessible, and most powerful engines for breaking these generational curses.
And I will take the contrasting position. While conscious parenting is, a beautiful ideal, I'll argue that the physiological and deep-seated psychological adaptations of trauma strictly require targeted professional intervention.
The neurobiological severity demands it, in your view?
Exactly. It demands more than just sheer willpower and good intentions.
Okay, well, to begin, I want to establish the incredible power of what clinical psychologists often refer to as reparenting. Conscious parenting, rigorous self-reflection, and robust community support are highly effective mechanisms for breaking the cycle of trauma because they grant the father immediate agency.
Immediate agency, right.
Yeah. A father who experienced maltreatment can actively choose to treat himself with the compassion and patience he deserved as a child. And in doing so, he models that exact emotional regulation for his own children.
Using his own past as a guide?
Precisely. Many men successfully use a toxic father as a literal counterexample, like a vivid, painful roadmap of exactly what not to do.
Right, I see that.
By waking up every single day and making the intentional choice to apologize, to show grace, and to embrace vulnerability, a man can forge an entirely new path. You do not strictly need a clinician in the room to choose empathy over anger. You need awareness.
Well, I hear the appeal of that. And honestly, the resilience of these men is undeniable. But if we look at the neurobiology, we see a much more complex picture.
Okay, tell me about the neurobiology.
My perspective is grounded in the trauma-informed behavioral ecology theory of fatherhood. It's often called the tribes theory.
Right, tribe theory.
Yeah. This framework looks at how a person's biological trauma interacts with their everyday environment. The clinical literature makes it abundantly clear that early trauma leads to severe adaptations.
Like PTSD?
Exactly. Post-traumatic stress disorder, major depressive disorder, and highly reactive anger. We are not just talking about bad habits here. We are talking about deeply ingrained neurological pathways.
So you're saying the body physically changes?
Absolutely. When a child experiences chronic danger, they suffer a disrupted HPA axis. That's the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis.
Let's unpack that for a second. For the listener trying to visualize this, what does a disrupted HPA axis actually mean in practice, like in daily life?
It means the body's central alarm system gets stuck in the on position. The hypothalamus detects a threat, the pituitary gland sounds the alarm, and the adrenal glands just flood the developing brain with cortisol.
Right. Fight or flight.
Exactly. Now, in a healthy brain, once the threat passes, a process called fear extinction takes over. The prefrontal cortex basically tells the amygdala, okay, the war is over, we are safe.
But in trauma survivors?
In trauma survivors, that fear extinction pathway is physically underactive. The brain never actually learns the all-clear signal.
Oh, wow. So they're always bracing for impact?
Yes. So my argument is simply this. You cannot outthink a dysregulated nervous system. Conscious parenting without therapy is like trying to install a brand new state-of-the-art operating system on a computer with a corrupted hard drive.
The hardware is the issue.
Right. The software of your good intentions is constantly fighting a hardware problem. It requires expert clinical dismantling.
I see why you think that, but let me give you a different perspective on how this actually plays out in the real world. Not in an fMRI machine, but in the living room on a Tuesday afternoon.
Okay, fair enough.
We have to move from the theoretical definitions of neurology to the practical reality of a triggering moment in the home. There's a very famous case study regarding a father who is actively trying to break his generational curse. One day, the neighbor's kid accidentally breaks his son's plastic Minecraft sword. The son runs inside crying. Instantly, the father's inherited reaction flares up.
The trigger.
Right. He yells, "That's what you get for letting people abuse your things." He literally snaps the broken toy in two and throws it violently into the trash.
Which is a classic, heartbreaking manifestation of the exact interpersonal reactivity and anger expression I'm talking about. I mean, the hardware failed.
Yes, it failed in that split second. But look at what happens next, because the repair is the crucial part. He hears his son crying on the porch, and almost immediately, his self-awareness kicks in.
He catches himself.
He stops. He asks himself, "What is wrong with me? I am acting like my father." He instantly goes online, orders a replacement sword, and most importantly, he brings his son back inside, shows him the order confirmation, and offers a sincere, incredibly vulnerable apology.
Right.
He tells his son, "I was wrong to yell. You didn't deserve that." To me, conscious parenting is like manually shifting gears in a car that you were taught to drive as an automatic.
That's a strong analogy.
It requires immense, exhausting effort. And yes, you might grind the gears or stall the engine occasionally, but you absolutely have the power to control the vehicle and change its direction. That father recognized his toxic behavior and corrected it in real time. That is how the cycle breaks.
I agree. The apology is beautiful. But doesn't it worry you that the baseline trigger, the violent snapping of the toy, still happened?
Well, he's human.
Yes, but that is what a clinical intervention aims to dismantle. We cannot gloss over the terrifying reality for the child in that initial moment. Researchers often refer to Pierre Jeanette's concept of action systems for danger.
Action systems for danger.
Yes. When that father saw the broken toy, his brain didn't process it as a minor suburban inconvenience. His traumatized nervous system perceived a literal threat to survival, triggering a fight-or-flight behavior in what was actually a perfectly safe environment.
But he caught it. He stopped the cascade before it turned into physical abuse, which is what his own father would have done.
He caught it after the psychological damage of the outburst was already done. Without therapy, this father is merely doing damage control after the neurological trigger has fired.
I wouldn't call a profound apology just damage control.
But he is relying on his prefrontal cortex to clean up the mess made by his overactive amygdala. And while the apology is vital for the child's recovery, the child is still being repeatedly exposed to unpredictable, explosive interpersonal reactivity.
You think it takes a massive toll?
The tribe theory emphasizes that paternal involvement quality is deeply compromised by trauma. Over time, living with a parent who explodes and then apologizes takes a massive toll on a child's own sense of security. They learn to walk on eggshells.
Therapy changes that.
Yes. Therapy doesn't just help you apologize better, it uses evidence-based techniques like EMDR to rewire those fear extinction pathways so you don't snap the toy in the first place.
That's an interesting point, though. I'd frame the psychological impact on the child differently. You're treating the snapping of the toy as an absolute failure of the father system, whereas I view the immediate, vulnerable repair as a profound developmental success for the child.
A success?
Yes, because children don't need perfectly regulated parents. They need parents who are willing to rupture and repair. That teaches the child that conflicts can be resolved safely. By an abuser even learn to make that kind of vulnerable apology?
And my answer is that it isn't always through sitting on a therapist's couch.
Then how?
It's often through redefining masculinity itself and utilizing community support systems.
Because community is important, certainly, but is not a substitute for clinical intervention.
I'm not convinced by that line of reasoning because we have to look at what maintains the generational curse in the first place: isolation and silent shame.
Right, the silence is deadly.
Exactly. Dismantling that curse involves completely redefining hegemonic masculinity to embrace emotional openness and care work. Men who grew up with abusive or absent fathers often had zero role models for this.
True. So by intentionally building a tribe of peers, other fathers who are also committed to conscious parenting, they learn emotional regulation through peer modeling. They read the literature together, they reflect, they hold each other accountable.
But peer groups lack clinical boundaries.
But this democratized, peer-supported approach directly attacks the stoicism and emotional constraint that fuels the trauma cycle. And crucially, it does so in a language and an environment that men naturally trust, without the clinical pathologizing of their experience.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that peer networks alone are enough. Let me tell you why. You bring up hegemonic masculinity, which is exactly the societal constraint that makes peer networks deeply insufficient and, in some cases, outright dangerous for trauma recovery.
Dangerous? That's a strong word.
It is, but it's accurate. Hegemonic masculinity isn't just acting tough. It's a rigid set of societal rules where men are essentially only permitted to express one negative emotion: anger. Sadness, fear, and vulnerability are penalized.
Right, but a conscious parenting group actively rejects those traditional norms. They are gathering specifically to be vulnerable.
In theory, yes, but in practice, peer networks often inadvertently reinforce these exact restrictive norms because they lack the necessary clinical expertise.
Give me an example.
Let's say a father is in one of these peer support groups, and he confesses that he is having terrifying, uncontrollable rage blackouts toward his toddler. A well-intentioned peer mentor might simply tell him to take a deep breath, pray on it, or just choose to be a better man for your kid.
Which isn't a treatment plan.
Exactly. That is not a clinical treatment plan for PTSD. In fact, it reinforces the toxic idea that his neurobiological symptoms are just a failure of masculine willpower. Or worse, the group might pivot to problem solving, which is a classic masculine defense mechanism, rather than holding space for the underlying trauma.
Okay, I hear that risk.
A neutral professional therapeutic environment is absolutely essential to safely deconstruct these deeply conditioned gender constraints without the pressure of performing masculinity for one's peers.
Look, I hear your point about the clinical safety of therapy, and in a perfect world, I would agree. But we have to confront the massive, glaring issues of accessibility, stigma, and the actual realities of mental health intervention.
Systemic barriers agree that lack of access is a profound public health failure, but a systemic failure does not negate the clinical necessity of the treatment.
But it completely dictates the reality of the solution. Furthermore, let's look at the pathology of PTSD itself. One of the core diagnostic criteria for PTSD is avoidance of trauma reminders.
Right, the avoidance symptom.
If a man's trauma is inextricably wrapped up in his own severe childhood abuse, the very nature of his psychological injury makes him actively avoid formal clinical settings where he is forced to sit in a chair and verbally recount that abuse to a stranger.
It's incredibly difficult, yes.
You cannot design a universal cure that requires the patient to do the one thing their disease prevents them from doing. If we insist that formal, professional therapy is the only valid path to breaking the generational curse, we are essentially abandoning countless fathers who either cannot afford it, cannot access it, or are psychologically blocked from attending it.
So we just leave them to figure it out alone?
No. This is why tools like conscious parenting and reparenting are so incredibly vital. They are democratized. They are universally accessible. A father can implement self-compassion at 2 a.m. when he's rocking a screaming infant in the dark. It empowers fathers immediately, giving them agency over their own healing in the exact moments they need it most.
I concede the severe lack of father-inclusive care. In fact, the clinical research highlights that fathers are vastly underrepresented in parenting studies and virtually ignored in perinatal care.
Barely an afterthought.
Yes. When an expectant mother enters the healthcare system, she is routinely screened for postpartum depression. Her mental health is monitored, and she is supported. Expectant fathers are completely sidelined, treated as secondary participants. It is a massive systemic failure.
Exactly.
But as I said, a systemic failure highlights the need to build better health systems, not to lower our standard of care to self-guided reflection. The perinatal period, that transition into fatherhood, is a highly specific critical window of neuroplasticity.
And my argument is that fathers are utilizing that neuroplasticity through their own daily intentional behavioral changes.
But intentionality has biological limits. Let's look at your example of the father rocking the crying infant at 2 a.m.
Okay.
That is the exact scenario where clinical intervention is paramount. If that father has an unhealed, dysregulated oxytocin system due to his own childhood neglect, he may physically be unable to feel the soothing effects of bonding.
So the crying just triggers panic.
Yes, when the baby cries, his amygdala fires, his heart rate spikes, and he feels mounting uncontrollable panic. Conscious intentions cannot force the brain to release oxytocin properly. Willpower doesn't control the endocrine system.
That's a fair point.
Relying solely on self-guided reflection leaves vulnerable families at an unacceptably high risk for the intergenerational transmission of maltreatment. We need an infrastructure that universally screens fathers for CMT during pediatric visits and offers them targeted guidance.
So trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy.
Exactly. Clinical interventions are required to literally rebuild the psychological faculties of trust and emotional regulation that were deformed by the trauma.
I see why you emphasize the biological mechanisms, and the need for better systemic screening is undeniable. But I think you're underestimating the sheer neuroplasticity driven by a father's willpower and his profound love for his child.
Love is powerful, but is it enough to rewrite the brain?
I argue it is. There are countless case studies of fathers who actively choose to do the exact opposite of what their abusers did. One father in the literature described his healing process as waking up every single morning and having to manually realign his behavior, almost like a chiropractor adjusting a spine out of habit, because his default emotional setting overnight resets to his father's toxic behavior.
Manually realigning every morning.
That daily realignment is exhausting, yes, but it is highly effective. By refusing to give in to the trigger, he is literally rewriting his neural pathways through repetition. He is functioning as his own intervention, and his child is reaping the immediate benefits of that heroic effort.
I deeply respect the immense willpower of the father in that example. Truly, it is a testament to human resilience. But listen closely to the metaphor he used. His default setting resets every single night.
Right.
He is fighting a literal war against his own nervous system every single day. In biology, we call that an allostatic load, the cumulative wear and tear on the body from chronic stress.
It is stressful, yes.
Over time, that constant hyperarousal, that constant manual suppression of trauma triggers leads to severe burnout, physical health disparities, and sometimes a catastrophic snapping point where the willpower simply runs out.
You think he'll eventually crack?
Therapy provides the tools to actually heal the baseline. The goal of clinical intervention is so that he doesn't have to wake up and fight his own shadow every morning. It moves the healing from a conscious, exhausting daily effort to an integrated subconscious reality.
That brings us to an incredibly important convergence in our discussion today. Whether we are looking at this through the lens of a daily conscious battle of willpower or through the strict necessity of clinical intervention to rewire the nervous system, we are both profoundly agreeing on the sheer bravery required here.
Absolutely.
Acknowledging the trauma, looking at the darkest parts of your own childhood, refusing to pass that pain on, and striving to provide a safe, nurturing environment for the next generation is an immensely heroic undertaking for any father.
I completely agree. The men we are discussing today are fighting invisible battles that most people cannot even fathom. And another point of convergence we've clearly reached is that isolation is the absolute enemy of healing.
Yes, 100%.
Whether a father finds his support through a community of peers committed to redefining what it means to be a man, or through a trained clinical professional guiding him through evidence-based trauma therapy, he cannot do this entirely alone in the dark. The generational curse thrives in silence, and it requires profound relational connection to be completely dismantled.
Perfectly stated. The complexities of fatherhood after trauma are vast, and there is so much more to explore about how society, our healthcare systems, and our local communities can better support these men. We need to stop treating fathers just as secondary caregivers.
Here.
And start recognizing them as vital, vulnerable individuals who need robust, specialized support during the transition into parenthood.
Indeed. The science of trauma-informed care is constantly evolving, and the medical community is finally beginning to recognize that fathers carry invisible wounds that require our full attention, our empathy, and significantly more of our public health resources.
As we wrap up today, I want to bring us back to where we started, the invisible inheritance, the legacy that isn't a vintage watch or a piece of real estate, but rather a shattered plastic toy on the back porch, and a father asking himself, who do I want to be in this moment?
A powerful moment.
Whether you believe that a father's sincere apology and his conscious choice to manually shift his behavior is enough to break the cycle, or whether you believe he fundamentally needs a professional guide to heal his nervous system so he never snaps the sword in the first place, one thing is certain. The work of putting those pieces back together is the most important work a man can do.
The question remains for us all to consider. Is the internal compass of a father's profound love and self-awareness enough to navigate the neurological storm of generational trauma? Or does the heavy lifting of true biological healing ultimately require a professional guide?
Thank you so much for listening to our podcast. For more information or to become a sponsor, please go to our website at www.newberryfilmworks.com. We'll get right back to you. Stay tuned for the next episode, coming up very, very soon.